Thank you. And thank you, Monika, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to have this conversation with you, in part because I wanted to introduce you to this audience. For those who don't know you, you have a particularly important role inside Facebook. We've been reading a lot of different headlines over the past several months about all sorts of elements of Facebook, both good and bad, and big questions about what's going on at the company and broadly within the technology industry. But you have a particularly unique role at the center of so much of it, in my mind, as the global policy head and the head of anti-counterterrorism. And you have a fascinating backstory. And I thought before we even began this conversation, we could just try to introduce you to everybody so everybody understood where you came from. I know you graduated from Harvard Law School, and you were an assistant U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. and Chicago. You prosecuted federal crimes, and also you were a legal advisor to the U.S. Embassy in Bangkok.
Yes.
So how did you go from being a federal prosecutor to this role at Facebook now?
It wasn't a direct route. I was a federal prosecutor for more than a decade and was looking to leave the government, but I still wanted to be doing something that I thought was socially impactful. So here comes this company, and I went and toured the campus and met some of the people working there, and what I saw was this passion that people really believed that they were helping to connect people around the world, and it was pretty appealing. So I went into the company through a legal job and hadn't been there too long when the company approached me about taking over the policy world. And basically what this means is setting the rules for what people can share on Facebook. So what can you post, what can you advertise? And over time, this has grown into a community where now we have people in countries all over the world. More than 85% of the people that are using Facebook are outside the United States. So it's this really global community where when we're setting these policies for what people can share, we have to be thinking about what does it look like in Turkey? What does it look like in Australia? And craft our rules accordingly. So it's been kind of a wild change, but
and I imagine one of them, and I want to touch on it now, really has been Russia and dealing with all of this. And I think the one thing that everyone's been trying to grapple with in terms of social media, this is a broader question than just Facebook, is not just whether there can be propaganda spread by people that we don't know who they are, but actually when real people, authentic people, decide to spread what might be described as divisive messages, and sort of what the role of social media is supposed to be, and what your role, since you are in large part personally, at some degree, the adjudicator of that.
Well, I want to be clear about one thing up front, which is this world of setting these policies is evolving. It's going to continue to evolve. We're not at the point where we say we've got it all figured out and here's how speech should be on social media. We're sort of learning as the community grows how people talk about social and political issues. Right now, what we do is we allow people to come to Facebook to discuss what's important to them. That's why we exist. If they want to talk about social issues that are important to them, that's great. We draw the line in a couple of areas. One is if it crosses the line into harassment or threats. Another is if it crosses the line into hate speech. Lawful in the United States, illegal in a lot of countries, but we don't allow it on Facebook. And another area is authenticity, and touched a little bit on this, but of course this makes sense that when you're speaking in your real voice and people know who you are, you're likely to be a little more civil, feel a little more accountable for what you're saying. So that's another cornerstone of our community. But this is all of the details of how we implement these policies are going to continue to change as the population changes and the way that they use social media changes.
Okay, so the real question, though, is, as I said, you are in large part of a group of people inside Facebook that are the adjudicators for these rules. One of the big questions that has been asked over the past several months is whether you should be adjudicating these things or whether policy as law should be developed by lawmakers. How do you think about that?
We think about it a lot because we are in so many different countries where speech is criminalized to varying degrees. So I mentioned hate speech. You look at the hate speech laws in India or Germany, they're not the same, but each country wants its laws enforced. So here's how we approach it. We have one set of community guidelines for the entire 2 billion plus people that are using Facebook on a regular basis. And that's primarily based on what we think it takes to keep the community safe. Now, beyond that, if a country reaches out to us and says, this doesn't violate your community standards, but it violates German law, we will look at that, and if it does indeed violate German law, then in some instances, we'll make that content unavailable in Germany only. And then we publish a report every 6 months where we say, here are the countries that have asked us to remove speech, and here's where we've done it by law. It's tricky, because when you do that, you are breaking this borderless service. And part of what makes Facebook so special is that you can communicate so freely all over the world. So anytime we do that, we are breaking that borderless nature.
Let me ask you a different question, which is, will technology always outpace the government? Which is to say, even the way you described it just now, it sounds like there are going to be instances, or instances occur that may be against the law in a certain place, and then you have to resolve it, but you're resolving it after the fact. How should we, from a public policy perspective, think about that?
You mean, are you thinking about trying to stop some of the criminal speech before it hits the social media platform?
I mean, we've had a whole conversation today about AI and,
right.
and what either technology can do, or whether you should be putting, frankly, humans right on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we use both. And one of the things we try to do is, if we know, for instance, a child pornographic image, or what some people call revenge pornography, a non-consensually shared nude image, or a beheading video, which may not be criminal speech, but it's something that certainly violates our policies. There is technology that allows us to stop known bad images from hitting the site at all. Beyond that, we're using technology to try to get faster at identifying speech before it's even reported to us. So you can report any piece of content on Facebook, whether it's a page, a profile, a comment, a photo. You can report that to us for violating our policies. We will review it, and if it violates, we'll remove it. But we understand increasingly that we can use technology to try to find that content before it's even been reported. And an example of where we're doing that, where we're really focusing on that, is in terrorism.
So let's talk about terrorism, or let's even talk just also about some of these terrible shootings that have taken place, and sort of the role that Facebook ends up playing in all of that. One of the things that was fascinating was the night that there was the shooting in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. A whole number of people signed up that evening under the username of the shooter.
Yes.
They call you when that happens.
Well, not me specifically. We have rules about how people can share graphic content on the site. Basically, you can share graphic content if you are doing it to raise awareness about something, or if you're doing it to condemn violence. But we will remove it if it's being shared to glorify violence. Similarly, if you're...
That's a really hard line.
Yes, it is. It is.
But who is sitting there at the computer having to make that decision every day? Because it's not just a policy decision, it's also a micro decision.
And it's also being done in dozens of languages around the world. So when these reports come in from our community and we're looking at this sort of content, anytime that there is, let's make it easy and say it's a terror attack where we know the perpetrator's name and we know the names of the victims. Okay, the perpetrator, we don't allow terrorists to have a presence on Facebook, full stop. Even if the person has never said anything bad that violates our policies on Facebook, that person is simply not allowed. Okay, so if there's been an attack and the perpetrator is identified, we want to find those accounts and remove them. We also don't allow people to praise that person or his or her actions. So, gosh, that attack was funny. If we found that, we would remove it. When it comes to the victims, there are certain protections that apply to their accounts, and we do that to protect them from, for instance, people trying to hack into their accounts, or people mocking their deaths. So there are a whole lot of policies that suddenly apply anytime you have some sort of event like that.
Suicides.
Yes.
Suicides, shootings. How can the algorithm itself actually know what it's watching?
Well, one of the things.
And I was going to say, we've been Facebook Living a number of these panels today. I can't imagine somebody with their phone is just, is doing this. There was an example. Didn't you have to deal with a situation of a suicide or something on camera recently?
Yes, we've had instances. We've now seen this on Facebook Live as well, which is our sort of live streaming video product. But even before we had Facebook Live, we do see people who will come to Facebook and say, I'm thinking of harming myself, or I'm just going to end it all. This is one of the areas where technology could be such a help to the community. Because what we see in these cases is that often the person gets help from the community that they're reaching out to online. And we use technology to try to facilitate that. So if I were posting, you and I are friends on Facebook, we're talking, and I say, I think I'm going to kill myself. If you report that, the first thing we do is we automatically send you, even before we've looked at your report, we automatically send you some resources so that you can reach out and help me. And then we look at the report, and if we see that indeed I am threatening to harm myself and it looks credible, then we'll send that to the appropriate authorities. That's an approach that has worked, and we have successfully helped intervene in some of these situations. So our policy, if somebody is threatening self-harm, is not to just remove it. We leave it up so long as the person looks like they are actually engaging on Facebook Live. They're actually engaging with their community, and then we'll contact the relevant authorities. But we don't just automatically take it down.
So, but here's a privacy question. You're sending that information to different governments around the world.
We're sending the information to authorities where we think that there is a real likelihood this person is going to harm him or herself, and that's part of our terms. Our terms basically say, if we think it's necessary to give your data to law enforcement to protect you or others, then we can do that. And that's no different than what we do, for instance, with child pornography or with terrorism. If we become aware of a risk of imminent physical harm to somebody, then our terms allow us to send that to law enforcement, and we do.
So are you monitoring people's messages back and forth to each other for this kind of material? And if you saw something, would you actually approach the government? How does that work?
It works a little bit differently than that. Let's again take the example of terrorist content. Some of that information, if you tried to upload a beheading video to Facebook that we knew about, we would stop that at the time of upload, and depending on what else is going on with your account, maybe there's other signals that tell us that your account might be suspicious, we'll look at that account, and we may fan out from that account to see if there are if your account is supporting terrorism, we're going to remove that, fine, but we may look at associated content and associated accounts to make sure that we're finding any terrorist activity.
I guess where I'm going with this is you have WhatsApp, obviously, is a piece of your business.
Yes.
It's what I think is supposed to be an encrypted, secure service.
Right.
People worry that terrorists and other people who want to do bad things are using that service to communicate with each other about their plans or whatever they're doing. What I'm asking is there some element of Facebook that's monitoring that?
There's use of technology to try to identify, to flag suspicious behavior, but it's not the same thing as having something that's, for instance, scanning text. So I want to be sort of cautious about the distinction. WhatsApp is a little different because WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted, meaning I send the message to you, it's encrypted on my device, and it goes through WhatsApp to you.
You never see it, I imagine.
You never see it. We don't have access to it. So what we do from the WhatsApp standpoint is if we get a request from law enforcement and it's let's say it's a valid search warrant from the FBI, we'll provide the information that we do have, which may include metadata, subscriber information about the person behind that account, but we don't have the content.
You said if it's a valid
Right.
request. When is it not valid? When will you fight them?
Oh, there could be you're asking a lawyer here. So there could be any one of a number of defects or flaws. It could be from a court that doesn't have the authority, or it might be that the standard is probable cause and they failed to state that standard in the process.
Given that we're talking about encryption and you are a former federal prosecutor, how do you think about encryption? Given that we've now seen the big debate occurred about a year and a half ago with Apple over that San Bernardino phone. But there is a big debate about what is transpiring on these applications and whether you, when you were a prosecutor, would have wanted to have access to that information, and whether the tech giants and others that operate these applications should be able to find a way to get it to you.
I think the first thing we have to be clear about is, what do we mean by encryption? So, Facebook uses encryption, sites use all sorts of encryption to protect information. I think we all think that's a good idea. Then there's end-to-end encryption. And end-to-end encryption is the sort like I mentioned on WhatsApp. When we think, here's how I think about it. When we encrypt information from end to end, we are stopping bad actors from having access to vulnerabilities. Anytime that you have some sort of access point for people to get data, that might be good for law enforcement. It might also be good for the people that we see behind data breaches, or people who might want to have access to medical information, or with United up here earlier, flight security information. So there are valid reasons to have that end-to-end encryption. I think we have to acknowledge that it does mean law enforcement won't have access to content in certain cases. And I certainly had cases as a prosecutor. You're prosecuting a child pornography case. The content might actually be encrypted, and I had that in cases, and you don't have access to it. So I think we have to acknowledge that, but we have to also look at the broader picture. And I can tell you, when I am carrying around my phone, I'm not particularly worried about the FBI producing a search warrant for the contents of my phone, but I am worried about bad actors who might want to hack into it. So I think that encryption is important.
Do you consider yourself an American company? And the reason I ask that is you operate globally.
Yes.
You have to comply with laws all over the world. We have a president who talks about America first. I imagine there are instances where if you were truly an American company, America first, you might be more willing, or in the balance of the debate, be providing information to one government over another.
Part of the legal infrastructure just works that way. So we are incorporated in the United States. We are subject to US laws, and part of that governs how we can respond to search warrants.
Do you feel like an American company, or do you think something else is going on, that these companies are so broad and almost borderless?
Well, like I said earlier, Facebook is so global. And I think that's part of what's very special about it, is that it feels like this borderless community. Having lived overseas, you mentioned Thailand earlier, my group of Facebook friends is very globally diverse. I think that's an important part of it.
Who are the kinds of people that you hire to do all of this work?
There's a couple things we have to focus on, namely subject matter expertise. If you want to be able to take down terrorist content, you have to have people who understand what that looks like. And then language expertise. And so over the course of the past year, if I think about the more than 150 people that we have dedicated to counterterrorism, that includes Brian Fishman, who's an ISIS expert. It includes Dr. Aaron Saltman, who is PhD in counter-extremism in Europe. So a lot of experts, but the thing those people bring is not just their own expertise, but they bring the relationships. We're always talking to academics, journalists, civil society, government officials, people who know what the latest trends are. So that's part of what we're hiring. And then with language expertise, boy, a lot of it is just looking to see where are we getting the most content. We need more Turkish reviewers, focusing on having Turkish reviewers that can help us staff these reports, review these reports 24 hours a day and 7 days a week.
Separate question around content. People talk about fake news. Do you think that Facebook has a responsibility to somehow identify news depending on where it comes from? Is there a real debate or conversation going on inside the company about the news business?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And what is it?
Well, I think one thing we're realizing is, look, we don't want false news on Facebook. we know people on Facebook don't want it. People want to connect with real information, authentic news. How we get there, I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think there are multiple ways that we attack this problem, and we're working on those right now. So, for instance, trying to help news media use Facebook, we started the Facebook Journalism Project back in January. And we have now worked with more than 2,600 publishers to understand what they need in terms of product tools to more effectively use social media to do things like attract an audience, create subscriber loyalty. And we've already rolled out some of those product changes. That's just on helping responsible news media outlets. But then there's this whole other component, which is what do we do with the stuff that is just fake? A lot of it's financially motivated. It's probably not a surprise, but if you can disrupt the economic incentives for the spammers out there who were spreading a lot of false news as clickbait, you can reduce a lot of this. So we're focused on that. We're focused on improving our technical tools for detecting inauthentic accounts because we know they're much more likely to be sharing false news. And we are focused on giving people more context about what they're seeing. So two things that we're testing and rolling out right now. We're giving people the ability to flag for us when a story might be false. And if that flag or other information about the way that the story is being shared suggests that a story is false, we're sending it to third-party fact checkers. If it turns out that that story is disputed, we're not the arbiter of truth, and we're not going to say this is right or this is wrong, but what we can do is show people, here is a spectrum. You're looking at this article, here are related articles on this topic. Here's the spectrum of what's out there so you can see it. We also can put out there, now on some articles you'll see a little eye. You click on that eye and it will give you information about the publisher. Here's the source, here's where this article came from, and here's what Wikipedia and other sources on the internet say about this publisher. So basically what this effort is about is trying to develop the savvy of people who are going to be encountering news online.
Final question for me, and then I do want to open it because I know you guys have questions for her, which is this. Facebook is becoming, and I know you don't want to be a news organization, but at least a media organization with its own content, or at least content that you are buying from others in the same way with new TV shows and other programming. Some of that programming unto itself may be offensive or divisive.
Yes.
Even a clip of Larry Sanders over the weekend on SNL making a Holocaust joke did not go over well. How do you would that be available? Would you make that? Would you let people see that?
Well, one of the things I said earlier is that the way that we craft our rules is going to continue to evolve. Facebook Watch, which is this new feature where we are providing content that some of it we have paid for the creation of it. Other times we're just sort of facilitating creators of TV shows or content, sharing it with a broader audience through Facebook. We have to consider some of these stories in their broader context rather than looking at a specific comment that occurs during the plot. So for instance, we don't allow people to promote self-harm or to use a racial slur to attack somebody. Fine. But if you have a fictional story where that's what the bad guy is doing, then that's part of the story and you have to let it in there. So we're crafting different standards to take into account the different ways that people try to use Facebook.
Okay, let's open it up to questions. I know there are people here who have them. I see a hand right over there. And then we'll go there.
Well, thank you for being here and sharing, and I don't envy the job you have balancing all these things. And I appreciate your candor in saying that it's evolving. One of the things I've been surprised there hasn't been enough attention focused on is the entry point where people sign up for accounts. Facebook, as far as we know for the foreseeable future, is not going to be regulated as a utility. It's a private company. And you get to set the rules for how people set up an account to use your platform. It would stand to reason to me that there could be a much higher bar of accountability at that first point of entry that would deter people from engaging in certain conduct because there would be a price to be paid for violating. At a minimum, and this is my question, is what are the things you're considering doing to hold people accountable when they abuse the platform to commit illegal acts. The people who propagated the fake news story about Cosmos Pizza in Washington, D.C. committed defamation, right? It's amazing to me that they haven't been sued, but I guess a lot of it's because some of it's coming from overseas. But there's illegal acts, there's all kinds of behaviors where there could be accountability attached to it.
You thinking about that?
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing in terms of being able to, at a minimum, identify people, force them to be real people, prove who they are, and then create some kind of bar of accountability if they abuse the platform?
So these are great questions, and we are focused a lot on what's the right amount of, I don't know if you want to call it friction, but what's the right amount of accountability to have at the outset when people create accounts? It is, by the way, influenced somewhat by law. For instance, the age at which people can sign up for accounts is something that is often driven by law. But in terms of asking people for their identification, our default is we want people to be able to come to Facebook and communicate very easily. We don't automatically check people's identification. We check it when we have an indication that there's a problem. And then we ask people to submit identification, and we actually do verify it before allowing them back in there.
There's no debate going on inside right now about that, meaning you don't have to verify yourself from the outset.
One of the things we're looking at in terms of greater transparency is when should we be asking people for identification? The other part of that is what counts as identification. Because if you say it's got to be a government verified ID, you look at a place like Afghanistan, that's actually really hard to do. Their government IDs don't have photos, some of them don't. So it's a complicated question at a global level.
Okay, we need a final question right there, sir.
Thank you. I happen to have friends on both sides of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and interestingly enough, I can see that the rules that you're enforcing are pretty much manipulated on both sides, that you're banning people, fortunately for us on both sides, but still banning them unfairly because the other side is trying to present them as being offensive. I was wondering if you have these layers of policing the police, and if you do, where does it end? How do you actually verify what the ultimate truth is and what is and what is not offensive?
And I would add, is there an appeals process?
There is an appeals process, but it doesn't right now extend to every piece of content. So if your page gets taken down, if your account gets taken down, you can appeal. If you comment on something and that gets taken down, you cannot. Quickly on Russia and Ukraine, because I know we're short on time, one of the challenges we've had there has been when people use ethnic slurs. Maybe one group considers it a slur, another group says, no, this is just how you refer to people. And also when people are using those words, whether they're actually using it to attack somebody else or whether they're using it self-referentially. We've had some enforcement errors over the years with Russia and Ukraine, and we know that, and we've actually taken some trips there to talk to the community and civil society to try to make sure that we're doing a better job with it.
Okay, we are going to leave the conversation there. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.